Have you ever heard of peptides? Perhaps you've heard of Ozempic and Mounjaro in the news. These peptides are a topic of much debate, even amongst nutritionists, and literally everybody has opinions on these. But today I am bringing on my good friend, a peptide expert. Her name is Nathalie Niddam, and she is going to share all about peptides. There are peptides for way more than just weight loss, and they are super interesting. They are fascinating little compounds. In today's episode, we're going to dive into the world of bioregulator peptides and regular other peptides. And we're going to learn all about what these molecules can do and how to take them safely. And we're also going to dive into our opinions on pros and cons of these weight loss peptides that are really getting a lot of heat in the media. I hope that you really enjoy this episode with my good friend, Nathalie Niddam. She is such a wealth of information, and you are going to be blown away by this topic of peptides. And we also, importantly, talk about how these peptides can fit in to help with blood sugar regulation. Of course, I'm always tying everything back to our blood sugar, to our metabolism. And these peptides, there are a lot of uses for them in addition to just the weight loss peptides. So I hope you enjoy this episode with my good friend, Nathalie Niddam. Nathalie Niddam is a holistic nutritionist, human potential and epigenetic coach, and the host of the Biohacking Superhuman Performance podcast. Nat is also passionate about peptides and peptide bioregulators, compounds that many in the space believe will revolutionize medicine in the next few years. And Nat happens to be a dear friend of mine. Nat, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Danny. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so excited because I feel like we've had so many long car rides and, Airbnb stays where we have been nerding out on nutrition. I'm like taking notes on everything you say. You are just such a wealth of knowledge, and guys, get ready to have your iPhone notes app out because you're going to want to take notes on everything that she says, I promise. Nat, tell us, let's start with your journey and how you got into this world of, peptides, bioregulator peptides, because I'm sure most people listening have never heard of that. And you guys are going to be kind of shocked about what these things are and what they can do. So let's take us through the journey.
I don't know how far back you want to go, but let me give you the 2-minute version, which is, I've always been a bit super interested in health and science and the human body and the whole thing. And so I studied physiology when I was in university. I kind of lost my way. Post-university, I kind of got into advertising sales and the advertising world. And, I kind of got lost in there, but I was always a fitness instructor. And I also always had kind of low level, I would say I always had kind of digestive issues. I had issues with candida. I had issues with I could see in my family people getting older and coming down, being diagnosed with things like type 2 diabetes or high cholesterol or, all these different things, and thinking man, I don't want to go there. And because I was always a little bit of a nerd, kind of believing that there's got to be a way to avoid these things, right? And so, fast forward, I have this career in advertising. I'm a fitness instructor all the way along because that's my way of kind of keeping my hand in this space a little bit. And then I want to say maybe 15 years ago or so, came across the paleo diet through a trainer I was working with. And he introduced me to Rob Wolf, who probably, between Rob Wolf and Mark Sisson, they were my first entries into any of this space. And I got really interested. And then I was seeing a chiropractor at the time, and I'm a talker, as you know, Danny. When the two of us get together, guys, it is hilarious. There's nonstop talk. The first time Danny and I met, she picked me up from the airport. We'd never met before. I think we said, hi, how are you? Good to meet you. And then it was a constant stream of dialogue for the next 2.5 hours.
That's right.
And we haven't stopped since, really. Anyway, so I'm at my chiropractor, and he's doing his thing, and I'm chattering away about this paleo diet and blah, 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 back when it was really new. And he, unbeknownst to me, is downloading this information from me to his patients. And he comes in one day and he goes, Nat, I got to tell you, all this thing you've been telling me about this paleo diet thing, I was telling this patient of mine, and a couple of months ago, and he went off and did exactly what you told me to do, which I told him. And he's lost like 15 pounds. Like, you should be getting paid to do this. And I kind of went, it's like a light bulb went off in my head. And I'm like, oh my God. By that time, I'm done with advertising and selling ads. And, it just like it wasn't working for me anymore. And so I went back to school. I became a holistic nutritionist. Then and it kind of goes from there. Like once you open that door, one of two things happens. You become a nutritionist, and that's how you hang your shingle. And if you're someone like me, who is, according to my husband, what's the term he was using? He doesn't use that term anymore, though. He was like, oh yeah, shiny object syndrome. There was always something else. I prefer to refer to myself as a lifelong learner. So it was one thing after the other. And a few years ago, after becoming a human potential coach and then an epigenetic coach, I came across peptides and peptide bioregulators. And it was kind of like, love at first sight, if you will. I just became fascinated with these little tiny compounds that really have the power to, they have the power to affect massive change in the body, to the point where it's caught the attention of pharma, both in good and bad ways. It's caught the attention of the FDA, not in such good ways lately. But I started a Facebook community, which exploded right at that beginning. And then a year later, I started my podcast, which, is what I do now. And that's my story.
Awesome. I love it. And it's so funny.
2 minutes. Sorry.
No, it's okay. We both got our in to this world through Rob Wolf and the paleo diet. So that was also my intro into this whole thing. And everything just made so much sense. It felt like the lights were turning on for the first time. And then I was also just so ravenous for this information. And you can just keep going down all sorts of rabbit holes. Like, now I'm really getting into mitochondrial health and all this stuff about metabolism. I'm reading Brain Energy by Chris Palmer. I'm like obsessed. And so I know that you've already been in that world, and I'm a little behind, but there's so many places you can go. So let's talk about these bioregulator peptides. I remember from presentations I've seen of yours that they have a really cool history, that that story about the Russian creator of it. So let's start with that, because I love that story.
For sure. So to the audience, to you guys, the listeners, there's two real main categories of peptides. We've got the long chain peptides, which some of you may have heard of, called things like BPC 157, thymosin alpha 1, and even the GLP-1 agonists, which you would be more commonly known as Ozempic and Mounjaro. And we'll come back and talk about those in a minute. The bioregulator peptides that Danny's referring to is a subset of those, and they are tiny little proteins. So a peptide, by definition, is a tiny protein. It's only, a peptide is less than 50 amino acids long. An amino acid is the building block of all the protein in your body. Right? So the bioregulators are only 2 to 4 amino acids long. So they're itty bitty. And they can actually, because they're so small, they can get through the cell membrane into the nucleus of the cell, and they bind there to DNA, so your genetic material. And in that way, they are able to upregulate the production of proteins, which can help to restore function and rejuvenate organs and tissues at a cellular level from within. The man that Danny's referring to is a gentleman a professor, a doctor, a PhD, like a dude, who actually tragically passed away just a couple of weeks ago. And his name is Vladimir Kavinson. And he started studying bioregulator peptides almost 40 years ago now in Russia. And he was a young doctor in the military in Russia. And he was given an assignment. They came to him and they said, Vladimir, you're a bright guy. We have a problem, right? We have astronauts coming from space, a hot mess because they're exposed to radiation. Going into space will accelerate your rate of aging. We have submarine guys coming back from nuclear submarine missions, a hot mess because they're affected by radiation. And we worry about our military as technology and weapons move forward, we worry that our soldiers are going to get damaged. So you need to figure out how to fix them. You need to figure out how to keep people young and turn the clock back. And he's kind of like, I mean, we can all just imagine the conversation of this guy going, sure, I'll get right on that. So the good news is what they also said to him is they said, you have carte blanche. You need lab rats, we'll buy you lab rats. You need human subjects for testing, you got human subjects. You have no end of resources. You just go to town and figure this out. And so he did. And so what he discovered very early in the game, that there are these tiny little proteins that I just described to you a minute ago that have been preserved across all species and levels of life. And typically in science, when researchers find something that is present in bacteria, in plants, in insects, in birds, in mammals, in humans, they're like, this must be super important, because if Mother Nature thought it was that important to have it everywhere, it's got to be super important. And kind of that's where it went from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. So there are these tiny sequences of amino acids, and you mentioned that they are for different organs and tissues. So what kind of bioregulators are there, and how do we use them? How do we combine them for best results?
So there are 21 bioregulators that are there's actually a couple more than 21, but there's 21 bioregulators that are commercially available. And where they were sourced and where Cavinson figured out he could get them from were the very same tissues, glands, and organs of animals. So what I mean by that is if you're looking for a heart bioregulator, you're going to be able to extract it from heart tissue. If you're looking for a liver bioregulator, you will be able to extract it from liver. And the sidebar to this conversation is, first of all, we make bioregulators in our bodies, but we make less of them as we age, number one. And number two, they are present in food. They are present in plants, and they are present specifically in animals. So when we talk about the value of a nose to tail diet and eating organs, that's part of the secret sauce. A lot of people haven't connected the dots. But the truth of the matter is that part of the secret sauce of eating organs is that probably we are also getting access to these bioregulators. The tricky thing is that most of these organs aren't really available, and or as a society, we kind of get grossed out, right? I don't want to eat ovaries personally, not that I could even find them if I wanted to, right? So nor am I particularly fond of brain. And my grandmother used to bake it into omelets and stuff, and I used to pick it out when I was a kid. I come from a culture where we eat a lot of organs, but I love heart. I mean, vegans, block your ears. I'm sorry. You're not
there's no vegans listening to this podcast. Go ahead.
Okay. So, sorry. But sweetbreads, thymus, kidneys, like kidney pie, right? Heart. These are all
pate,
organ meats
liver.
that are part of different cultures. And so, sorry, I just raised my desk a bit. So, but a lot of people don't want to eat them. So the first level of getting access to bioregulators after eating organs would be to go towards those supplement brands that are desiccating organs. And so this is like ancestral supplements or heart and soil supplements. Like those brands, they've got the his package, the her package. Mm-hmm. They're literally taking organs, drying them out, grinding them into powder, putting them in a capsule, which takes the ick factor away, not to mention the fact that it makes it possible to even access them.
Yeah.
And that is a form of bioregulator right there. Or at least it's not that it's a form of bioregulator, is you're going to get some bioregulator in there. Yeah. The next way to get them, so that's great, right? Next we have supplements that Cavinson eventually created and marketed. And these are referred to as the Cavinson bioregulators. And so the Cavinson bioregulators are available in capsules. They are a very refined, basically, source of the bioregulator peptides that have been isolated from the actual tissues and organs, mostly from young cows. Sometimes they'll be from sheep, and sometimes even from pig. The truth is, though, that by the time you get that capsule, there's no protein left, and there's no actual discernible protein from the animal left. You're really down to very specific sequences of proteins. There are probably in those supplements some cofactors also from the original tissue. But what's interesting is, unlike desiccated thyroid, for example, where you're getting enough cofactors, you're getting some T4, you're getting some T3, so you can't give desiccated thyroid to someone, let's say, who's hyperthyroid, because it's going to drive them into overdrive. You can give the thyroid bioregulator to someone who's hyper or hypothyroid, because it's been refined to a level where all that's really there is really the bioregulator. And the reason why that's important is because what bioregulators do is they really work towards normalizing the organ or the system. So what they're trying to do is bring you back to homeostasis, which is basically a fancy big word for balance. So we're not trying to make your thyroid a superthyroid. We're not trying to make your brain a super brain. There are other ways to do that, right? But it's not going to be the bioregulator. But the nice thing about that, what that means is it gives it, sorry, I didn't interrupt us, did I?
No, you're fine.
Oh, no, I'm good. Basically what it does is it means that it gives you a measure of safety. Because you're not going, for example, there's some, well, all of the bioregulators are important. Trying to pick a favorite bioregulator is kind of like picking a favorite child. You can't tell me that, even though the pineal gland bioregulator is probably the most well known, and if somebody was only going to have one bioregulator, I would say that's the one. You can't tell me that it's more important really than the heart, right? Because we need a heart. So you've got bioregulators, and let's see how many I can rattle off in a couple of minutes. We've got the pineal gland bioregulator. We've got the central nervous system bioregulator. There's the thyroid, the adrenals, the heart, the blood vessels, the liver, the pancreas, which you guys would be particularly interested in. There's a stomach bioregulator. There's bone marrow. There's muscle. I'm forgetting a bunch, but you get the idea. Right? Yeah. So all the major lungs, all the major systems and organs are there. I'm going to stop talking because I feel like I've been talking for a while, and I want you to ask the questions that that's direct the conversation where you need it to go.
No, that's great. So hearing about you saying that the pineal gland bioregulator is the most important, it reminds me of a study that you shared where they gave the pineal gland and then they gave the pineal gland plus. So can you walk us through that, even if you don't remember the exact statistics of the percentages of improvement?
Because this was a good study. Them.
Yeah.
I mostly remember them. So basically, this is a very famous study that Cavinson did, and it was one of the first human studies that he performed. And what he did is he took a fairly large group of elderly people, and he split them up into a control group and a test group. The control group were given polyvitamins, and the test subjects were given epithalamin, which is yet another form of the bioregulator. So one thing everybody should understand right here, right now, is that nomenclature of bioregulators is kind of like going to IKEA, right? You have no idea what any of the words mean. Except, unlike IKEA, where everything has one name, in bioregulator land, everything has 3 names at least. It has a trademark name, it has a name for the injectable synthetic form of the bioregulator, which we haven't even talked about yet, and it has a name for the patented kind of biologic extract that is available in capsules. So we have endolutin, epithalamin, and epidolon, all of which refer to the pineal gland bioregulator.
Okay.
All right. So in this study, half the people got given the polyvitamins. The other half of the people were given epithalamin, which is an injectable form, an intramuscular injectable form of the pineal gland bioregulator. Now, before everybody runs off looking for it, it's very hard to find outside of Russia because they can't export it for a number of reasons, which you can imagine how governments would kind of lose their minds about these things. So regardless, they were given epithalamin. This was a 12-year study. These people were between the ages of 50, I want to say 55 to 75, something like that. He called it the old people study. Thank you. And what they noticed is, you're right, I don't remember the exact numbers, but basically what they noticed is that the mortality rate was dramatically lower. Like I think it was like 30% lower after 6 years, and half the rate in the people who just got the epithalamin after 12 years. And what's also really interesting is they really only use the bioregulators for 2 years of those years. So that kind of gets people's attention, right? Then he said, okay, we're going to up the ante. We're going to take even older people. We're going to take 75 to 85-year-olds. Nobody expecting them to live 12 years because they all come from Siberia and they have a hard, crappy life. So we're going to only follow them for 6 years. But now we're going to have 3 groups. Our first group is going to get the infamous polyvitamins. They clearly drew the short straw. The second group is going to get epithalamin. But the third group, we're going to up the ante, and we're going to give them epithalamin, which is, as you remember, the pineal gland bioregulator. And we're also going to give them the thymus bioregulator. Now, why is this important? Because the thymus gland, the seat of your immunity, what takes us out as we age? Inflammaging. Inflammaging is dysfunction of our immune system. And so if we can keep our immune system firing healthily into old age, we have a really good chance of living a longer, healthier life. And sure enough, this did not disappoint. By the end of the study, 88% of the poor polyvitamin people were gonzo, versus only 33% of the people that got epithalamin and the thymus gland bioregulator, and the epithalamin only group were in the middle. They had maybe half. I can't remember exactly the numbers. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
I should have a cheat sheet just glued to my desk with those numbers. But the point being that people who just got the pineal gland bioregulator had a better outcome, and then people who got the pineal gland and the thymus gland bioregulator had the best outcome. And that really kind of set the stage for saying, wow, we really need to understand like what's going on here. So to share with the audience how the heck a pineal gland could possibly influence our ability to live a longer, healthier life, we need to talk a little bit about what does it do, right? So the pineal gland is this tiny little pine nut shaped gland and sized in the middle of your brain. So number one, when you get into human anatomy and you start to understand how itty bitty some of these structures are that actually run the show, it's pretty impressive. Right?
Yeah. A pine nut is minuscule.
It's itty bitty. But what this little teeny tiny pine nut does is it regulates your circadian rhythm, which is something that I know that you talk about a lot, yes. Right? It also is very important for normalizing melatonin production. So now what's interesting about melatonin is we all talk about melatonin as the sleep hormone, but the interesting thing about melatonin is it's also one of the most powerful antioxidants in your body. And another branch of research that Cavinson did on the pineal gland bioregulator is that it actually has anti-tumor effects. So, and how could it possibly do that? Well, melatonin, we know there's a very strong link between healthy melatonin levels and not getting cancer. So that's a little interesting little sidebar. The other thing that Epidolon does, it helps to activate an enzyme called telomerase. And telomerase is an enzyme that is responsible for keeping the ends of your DNA, those telomeres, those little shoe-length little things on the ends of your DNA, it helps to restore and keep them at an appropriate length. And that's important because you need healthy telomere length on the ends of your DNA so that your DNA can continue to replicate, so that you can get tissue renewal at a cellular level. Like your audience may have heard at some point somewhere along the way that your liver turns itself over 100% every 7 years. Well, how does that happen? That happens because the DNA in the liver is driving the production of new cells at an appropriate rate so that your whole body renews itself. I think it takes 15 years or something. So if we think about that, like that's kind of a little bit of a brain-blowing thing, right?
Yeah.
So, and then the other thing that the pineal gland is super important for is it is considered the master endocrine regulator. So think of it as the orchestra conductor for your whole the whole hormonal system. So having a pineal gland that is balanced and healthy helps to bring overall balance to the hormones, all of your hormones. So before anybody sits there and thinks, holy crap, all I need to do is take the pineal gland bioregulator and all of a sudden my insulin's going to be perfect and my sex hormones will be perfect and my cortisol is going to be perfect. Doesn't exactly work that way, but it kind of brings, it helps to bring balance. It's part of the equation. And that brings us to the idea of why bioregulators very often are used in combination with each other. Right? So for example, like I've seen now on a number of occasions, women who are cycling, who may have lost their cycle or who are, having issues hormonally, as part of the protocols that they're doing, which might be stress reduction, circadian rhythm, nutrition, supporting the adrenals and there's all the things, on a number of occasions I've seen where they've taken the pineal gland bioregulator and the ovarian bioregulator, sometimes as well as adrenal and or thyroid, and they will get their cycle back.
Amazing.
After a few months. It doesn't always happen, but I've seen it now happen enough times to be like, must be something here, right?
Yeah.
So that's
yeah.
That was really long.
No, it's great. It's great.
Okay, good.
So where does one find these bioregulator peptides? Because you said that are they only in Russia? Like, can you access them here in the States?
Yeah. So the epithalamin and the thymolin, so those actual extracts that you would inject intramuscularly, those are kind of off the table, right?
Okay.
In North America, like where I get my bioregulators from, the oral, which are considered nutritional supplements, right? I order those from a company in the UK called Profound Health. And if you want, we can throw the link into the show notes.
Yes, please. And we'll put your discount codes and everything because
Sure. So thank you. So basically, the things have gotten complicated over the last couple of years. And it all started when this Russia-Ukraine war started. And that has really thrown, well, quite apart from ruining a lot of lives, let's be real. It's also made getting things out of Russia very complicated from a business perspective. And so I would say that the supply of bioregulators has been very up and down. Profound Health, where I get my bioregulators from, have a brand called Nature's Marvels, which is great because what Nature's Marvels is a pretty box with a very pretty picture on it and no Russian words, only like bladder bioregulator, heart bioregulator. So very clear, no crazy names. But they take the actual Cavinson bioregulators and throw them in those boxes. That line has been out of production now for a few months because of a whole bunch of supply chain issues. What they do have in stock are the actual Cavinson Russian bioregulators. And those are in not so fancy, a little bit more serious looking white boxes. So those can be accessed from there. There are also the synthetic bioregulators that we didn't really talk about. So what a synthetic bioregulator is when they've identified the actual amino acid chain from the full extract. And what they've done is they've been able to resynthesize it in a lab. And now it can be reintroduced to the body as almost like as a simpler form of the bioregulator, right? And very often that synthetic bioregulator is the best way for people who are very sensitive or who have autoimmune issues to access those bioregulators because it's almost like they're delivered with less noise, right? So those synthetic bioregulators can also be found on the Profound Health website. They are accessible as sublingual drops. So remember we talked about how tiny these things are. So the cool thing about compounds that are that itty bitty is that they can get across, they can literally under the tongue, you have so much vascularization there, they can get across the buccal membrane into the bloodstream and go straight to where they need to go without going through digestion.
Amazing.
So that's another product that's available at Profound Health. And then there are the synthetic injectable form, which is, there's more of a learning curve there. It's a bit more intimidating for people because now it involves things like insulin needles. So it's not everybody's cup of tea. So we won't spend too much time talking about them, but just so people understand, you do have a couple of different ways of accessing the synthetic bioregulator. But then for the oral bioregulators, my favorite place is Profound Health. There's another company called Cosmic Nootropics that also has another brand. So there's definitely a couple of different places to get your hands on them.
Okay.
But yeah, that's it.
Awesome. So yeah, I definitely want, I'll get all those links and put them in the show notes because I also want to check some of these out. So if someone is struggling with blood sugar issues, let's say, of course, there are different causes because everything impacts blood sugar and blood sugar impacts everything. But what would you say just would be a good maybe starting combo of some bioregulators? Maybe I'm thinking liver, pancreas.
Yeah. So again, let's think about all of the different things. Yeah, all of the different things that can help balance blood sugar. So for sure, first of all, pancreas and liver, bang on, right?
And adrenal.
That's right.
So those are the three major organs of blood sugar regulation. And then I would think that the pineal, because of the circadian rhythm aspect. And then, our thyroid is super involved in our metabolism. So, yeah.
Exactly. And so all those four for sure. And then you might even think about the central nervous system bioregulator, right? But it's going to vary from person to person because you're going to be, you as a health coach, right, is going to be sitting there with your client saying, okay, what's involved in your issues?
Yes.
Right? So if nervous system is a big thing for you, if you're in a sympathetic state all the time, if your cortisol's off the charts, the whole 9 yards, if you're showing signs of your adrenal glands kind of struggling to keep up, or your thyroid, that's where you're going to that's where the finesse, there's a lot of art to the science of bioregulators.
Yes.
Right.
As with supplements as well, but I have a feeling this even more so. So I love that.
I mean, maybe more so, but maybe the same. It's like, there's not a blanket solution for everybody. Yeah. And so I do think that as a practitioner, what we want to think about is let's understand or try to gain understanding of what are the systems that are involved in this person's situation. Right. What are the lifestyle and dietary changes or interventions that this person really needs to lean into? And then what are the bioregulators that can help to support those systems that may be struggling?
Yeah, perfect. Exactly. And that's kind of what we think when we're, thinking about someone's blood sugar in general. We want to think about, what are the factors that are most impacting you? So sometimes it's diet, but sometimes it's this chronic, being stuck in fight or flight where your nervous system can't calm down or there's mineral deficiency or there's circadian rhythm dysfunction. So there's so many possible reasons why we could be out of balance. So that's really helpful. It's so cool. So, so do we feel good on the bioregulators? Do we feel ready to move on to regular length peptides?
Tell me. I mean, I think that's a good touch point. And I think if people are interested to learn more, we can come back and talk again, or I have, certain podcasts on it. There's lots of different ways to skin that cat. But for the interest of time, probably it might be time to move to the next category.
Okay, cool. So let's move to the next category, which is what?
So the next category are your longer chain peptides, right? And so the bioregulators typically, I will say that with the pineal gland bioregulator, I have definitely seen that some people who have circadian dysregulation as part of a whole plan will say, oh my God, when I use the pineal gland bioregulator, I can't believe how much better my sleep gets. You're not going to hear that from someone who has basically good sleep. Just to be clear.
Like me, yeah.
Right?
I sleep pretty well, so I have a feeling it might not. I mean, I use the glasses. I'm doing all the things for my circadian rhythm. So I was just actually thinking, I wonder how much that would actually help me because I do feel like I'm pretty regulated in that spot because I work hard on it.
Exactly. And so you, as a younger person who's approaching, once you cross the threshold, once you finally join the 40 or 45, at that stage of the game, or you might do a telomere test, right? And you might get an understanding of, oh, my telomeres are maybe very close to my chronological age, or maybe I'm much younger than my chronological age. You don't need to do much. But if by some weird fluke your biological age is older, like your telomere length lines up with someone older than you, so then you might say, well, maybe then there's an argument that says that I might use the pineal bioregulator to try and help to move that back a little bit, to restore that. Plus, it's going to also it might be helpful as part of all your other lifestyle interventions, right? So that would be some case use. But going to the longer chain peptides, moving back towards those. So the bioregulators, typically, you're not going to feel that much in the short term. It's more of a slow build.
Okay.
The other longer chain peptides are almost like they are signaling molecules, and they are much more immediate, typically, in their effects, which is both good and bad, because on the one hand, you kind of got to know what you're using and why you're using for, so that you don't over push things. But on the other hand, if you work with someone who really knows what they're doing and you're having an issue, you should be able to see results much faster. It's just going to be on a different level. But we talked earlier about talking about the peptides that really play more of a role in the work that you do on metabolism and blood sugar control. And one of the ones that is, I call it the Swiss Army knife of peptides, is BPC 157. The bad news is that the injectable form of BPC 157 just landed, unfortunately, on a list by the FDA of compounds that have been reclassified as a class 2 compound, meaning that they should not be sold to the consumer because they're saying that there's not enough research and they don't know that they're safe and blah, blah, blah. Unfortunately, it's unfortunate because the BPC 157 can be very helpful to a lot of people in many different ways. The good news is my understanding is that the oral form of BPC 157 is not off the table. Okay. And so it can be very powerful for anything GI. And even in some cases, for some musculoskeletal issues, as long as they're not too serious, right? Yeah. But the two peptides, because we're not doing a 2-hour Joe Rogan style podcast, the other two peptides probably that your community will be interested in are the GLP-1 agonists. And by those I mean Ozempic and Mounjaro, because they've gotten a lot of attention over the last couple of years, both good and bad. And they are basically peptides that pharma companies have been working on and tinkering with to kind of take naturally occurring peptides from our guts and say, well, we know what they do, but they do it like they're only around for a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes. What if we could keep them around longer? What would happen if? And what happened is you extend that effect much longer. And so as a result, what GLP-1 does in the gut is it does all of the things that we talk about semaglutide doing, which is Ozempic, and GLP-1 and GIP. Those are the two peptides that are present in tirzepatide. So semaglutide is an incretin effector, and tirzepatide, which is Mounjaro, is a dual incretin. And
okay.
So, right?
Keep going. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's okay. So ultimately what they do, why they are able to do what they do. And so we'll talk about the good, and then we'll talk about the cautions, if you will, because we've all heard about Ozempic face. We've all heard about all the crazy things that people are talking about these days. What they basically do is they can help to restore insulin sensitivity, which your community understands is it's one of the things that breaks in people. They become insulin resistant, and it becomes really hard to move into a metabolism that is now flexible again, right? People can get stuck there. The other thing that it does is it increases your resting metabolic rate. So it increases, if you will, it ups the temperature on the furnace so that you're burning more calories at rest. Another thing that it does is it slows down gastric emptying. So what does that mean? That means that when you eat a meal, the food stays in your stomach longer, which is a good news, bad news thing. So the good news is that it means that you get fuller faster and you stay fuller longer, so you're not as driven to eat as much food. The bad news is that it slows gastric emptying, but it slows the passage of food through the GI tract. So especially in the case of semaglutide, this can show up like a form of constipation. So when people are using these peptides, you do have to be very conscious of your digestion. It's a good idea to use digestive enzymes. And it's a good idea to make sure, like if you're only pooping all of a sudden once a week, this is a problem. And you need to work with your coach or whoever to increase your fiber uptake, increase your hydration, increase your stomach acid, like use those digestive enzymes, like all the things, right? And maybe probiotics. The other thing that they do that is pretty incredible is they affect the food reward center in the brain. So it actually makes you less interested in food, which can be a really good thing for people who can't stop eating. It also, as a sidebar, can be really powerful for helping people who have addiction issues, whether it's smoking, alcohol, drugs. So there's a lot of research going on in this area, but people are definitely noticing that their drive to eat, and even people who drink, their drive to drink diminishes when they're doing the GLP-1. Now, the caveat I want to say here is because the GLP-1 also increases the production of insulin in response to glucose, it does put a little more strain on the pancreas. And so in a perfect world, we don't use these peptides and have a drinking problem at the same time. We don't want a drinking problem anyway, but definitely, I definitely, if I'm talking to people about this, I prefer, both from a lifestyle and an overall health perspective, but definitely if you're using these peptides, it's a great idea to take a break from the booze while you're doing it. Also, you're going to eat less food. And that's good and that's bad. Why? Because what happens is that people start to lose weight. They eat a lot less food. So if they had a great diet, they might be eating less great food. That might not be so bad. If they were eating a really not optimal diet to begin with, we now have people who are eating not great food, and now not only are they going to be hypocaloric, but now they're going to be deficient in a whole bunch of nutrition, like nutritionally dense things that you need to be healthy. So vitamins, minerals, cofactors, all the things. Proteins. And then and protein. And this is where we get into trouble, right? Because this is where we start to have the conversation, number one, about people who, you know, they might lose a lot of weight, but they may feel awful or they may look terrible because now you're undernourished. You're underfed and undernourished.
Yeah.
Versus being overfed and undernourished, which is no better, but but you're fitting into a size 4 jeans, so you're like, okay, I'm cool, I'm good. I can have a donut and fit into my size 4 jeans, yay me. But the bad news is you're not going to look, you're not going to look so great naked, which may or may not be your concern. But more importantly, if you've lost your lean muscle mass, you've lost the engine that's going to allow you to come off of these at some point and be healthy and not be addicted to them for the rest of, not even addicted, but dependent on them for the rest of your existence, right? So eating protein, as our friend Amy likes to say, like it's your job, right? So we make sure that people are eating protein first. We make sure they're chewing their food. We make sure they're getting hydrochloric acid so that they're breaking down that protein. We make sure that they're getting their healthy fats. And we also want to make sure that they're getting micronutrients. And so because you're not able to eat as much food, sometimes what I suggest to people is, in addition to eating that nutrient dense diet in small amounts, you might need to start using things like essential amino acids to increase your intake of protein without having to force yourself to eat too much protein altogether. You might be
this
a good
is like
idea.
Keon aminos,
Like
perfect aminos.
Would be great. Another one would be a really good greens powder because it's going to give you a lot of those micronutrients. Another one would be a great reds powder. So something that I like to see people do is using essential amino acid, a greens powder, and a reds powder. I call it my, what did I call it? My swamp water in the morning, right? So I'm going to have green. It looks hideous.
My swamp water.
It's actually pretty good. But it is swamp water. It looks like swamp water because it's got in there, and I'll put a lot of stuff in there. I'll put my my phospholipids in there. I'll put my greens, my reds. I'll put in, I use colostrum powder, like the Armra, so I'll put that in there.
Yep.
I'll put like all kinds of things go in there. They all taste fine. Creatine goes in there.
Yep.
I might actually throw in one of the like, it could be Kion. The thing with Kion, the powders, they actually taste fine to me. So
Yeah,
I'm
they
not
taste
trying to
fine.
hide them.
Exactly.
Some of the competitors' brands sometimes don't taste so great. So you can play with throwing a scoop of that in there and see if the taste kind of just blends in.
Yeah.
But drinking that swamp water goes a long way to topping up your nutritional needs without having to eat, even though you're not eating a ton of food.
Yeah, like a nutritional insurance policy, like we're covering the bases and just making sure to get as many nutrients in as possible, because you are going to, if you have a very significantly lowered appetite, you're just not going to get in the nutrients you need. And, I always tell my clients that we are now nutrient seekers, not calorie avoiders, because we still have to be always searching for nutrient density, because it's not the avoiding of calories in and of itself that's going to help anything. Like, we need the nutrients because they are running the show. So you can avoid calories all day long and then you won't have any energy. You won't have anything to show for it. So that's a really important point. So we're prioritizing protein, getting in as many nutrient dense foods as possible, potentially supplementing with greens, reds, and essential amino acids. Anything else that I missed from that?
No, you got that. And then the other thing is exercising. So here's the thing. So depending on where you are in your journey, if you're very overweight, like if you're carrying too much extra weight for your body and you're inflamed and all the things, the motivation to move is pretty low. It's hard, right? Yeah. One of the superpowers of these GLP-1 agonists is by helping people to drop some weight and lose some of that inflammation. It kind of breathes new life into them, because now all of a sudden, number one, they're seeing light. They may not even see the light from the end of the tunnel, but they're seeing there's actually light in the tunnel. And it helps them to kind of get motivated and even feel well enough to get moving. And moving might be, I'm not talking about going to a CrossFit gym and doing a WOD all of a sudden, but I'm talking about like going out for a walk, or, getting on a treadmill, or whatever, or getting on our Carol bike and doing a rehab workout. But all of a sudden, I think it's so unkind sometimes, our attitudes towards people who have been stuck for a really long time. They're carrying too much weight. They feel horrible. They're not sleeping well because they can't. They're like they're kind of stuck in a trap. Yeah. The beauty of this is if we can break that trap open and help them to feel a little bit better. God love every one of them. At the end of the day, they want to feel better so that they want to and are able to move. And that's the superpower of this stuff. So if we can mitigate the downsides, which is the slowed down digestion, which is the, and the slow digestion, there have been a couple of articles in the media recently that are very, I'm going to call them very sensationalist, right? Like about like a woman who ended up in the hospital with a blockage, and another one who's going to have diarrhea for the rest of her life. Like, I don't even know. The problem is they give us very little information about these people. And what they also don't say is that these are very isolated cases. So it's not to say, don't worry, there's no problem, this will never happen. What it is to say is, don't just go and get your hands on this stuff and think you can just use it and keep everything else the same. You need to pay attention. You need to do all the other work, right? Yeah. And you need to watch for the signs. And but the good news is, like, there was a concern for a long time that GLP-1 agonists could potentially drive up the risk of pancreatic cancer, and we all know that ain't worth it. That's worth nothing, right? Yeah. And so there's a new study that just came out recently that dispelled that completely. They did a fairly long-term study on a couple of thousand people who already had diabetes, which is already a predisposing risk for pancreatic cancer. Yeah. And they found no increased risk of pancreatic cancer in that population. So it's a good sign. I'm not going to say it's the end of the story, but it's definitely a sign in the right direction.
Right.
The other black box warning is for certain rare types of thyroid cancer, which specifically medullary thyroid cancer. And that, that one, I think, first of all, medullary thyroid cancer was observed in rats in the studies. One thing to know about rats is they have a very high density of GLP-1 receptors on their thyroids. Humans do not have that. Number one, I don't think yet that there's been a human case of thyroid cancer. I could be wrong about that, though. I haven't looked through the research recently, and that's constantly being updated and changed. One thing that's for sure is anybody who has a history of thyroid cancer or thyroid cancer in their family, probably a better idea to use a different strategy and not the GLP-1s. There are certain populations of people that probably should not use them.
Yeah. And so just like with any supplement, any medication, there are always a risk of side effects. So, take all those things into account. But when it comes to, I just feel like there's so much hate and people saying like, this is so lazy. And I also feel like, there are definitely going to be people out there who are overweight and who are maybe who one would look from the outside and be like, oh, this person is lazy. But when someone is in a bigger body, there's a very high chance that there's inflammation, there's metabolic issues, which means that their cells and their organs are not getting the energy that they need. So they're exhausted. Oftentimes, the bigger you get, the more tired you are because your body is struggling to utilize the energy. It thinks that it doesn't have any energy on your body. You're more leptin resistant, you're more insulin resistant, and your cells are starving. So a person like that is going to feel exhausted. And so from the outside, they might say, oh, that's lazy. They're trying to get quick energy and they get hooked on, like processed food. And then there's those people who are doing all the things. They're not eating processed food. They have maybe gone through menopause. Maybe they don't know that they should be replacing their hormones and they're super insulin resistant and they're working out and they're trying all the things and they can't lose weight. Why can't we give this person, throw this person a bone, I certainly think that these should be looked at as a potential tool for people who are struggling. And I also strongly always recommend that we have to, like you said, be doing all the things. We have to be eating well. We have to be looking at our circadian rhythms, our light exposure, getting in nature, moving our bodies, getting out toxins, connecting in community, looking at our mindset, our nervous. I mean, this is a lot of things that we have to be doing, but sometimes people are doing all these things and not finding any benefit. And it's sad to see that it's so looked down upon that it's like, society looks down upon people who are in bigger bodies anyway. And then they want to do something to get get well or lose weight, and then we're looking down on them again. It's just like they can't win. So I am neither like pro peptide, anti peptide. I'm use it if it feels right for you. Do your due diligence and learn, all the effects and what you should do, just like, you shared with us, Nat, all the things to mitigate any potential negatives. But, just keep in mind that you're going to have to do all the things right if you want to keep that weight off. And so that's the goal, is that it's just this like tipping point. It's just helping you get there. And then you have to continue doing all those things. There is no, free pass when it comes to losing weight. There just isn't. You can't get around the fact that you have to do the work. So, yeah.
That's exactly 100% amen. All the things you said. The last thing I want to say is the whole side effects of nausea. That is a thing. It can be more so for some people than others. Usually it's manageable if you start at a very low dose and titrate up very gradually to your dose. Now, here's one other common mistake that I see, and I think it's the last thing I really want to say about this, is that too often I see people like, they get to a dose, a fairly low dose, and they're losing, let's say, a pound a week. And they're like, oh, no, that's not good enough. My friend, she lost like 10 pounds the first month, and they keep upping the dose. To me, slow down.
Yeah.
Your body releasing 1 pound a week of weight is great.
That's
It's
great.
a nice pace. Your body can adapt. It can help your brain. It can even help your brain to reset your set point to a point. So take your time, go slow, resist the temptation of going up and up and up in a dose. What I've actually seen happen with that sometimes is it backfires, where the body just slams on the brakes and says, you know what? I don't care. We're staying right here. Because clearly there's a famine, we're in trouble, and we're just going to shut it down. And I've seen this happen a couple of times. And a couple of times what I've seen happen is then people go back down in the dose, and sometimes it restarts the engine. So, you know what, folks, like, be patient. The nausea thing, 100%, for the most part, can be managed by titrating your dose up very gradually. And by this, I mean like every 2 to 3 to 4 weeks. Some people respond very badly to GLP-1s, and it's a no-no for them. They're just like virtually really nauseous all the time, and that's not worth it. So there's other strategies to use. But just know, go slow and find that minimal effective dose for you and try to stay there and use it as the training wheels on a bike. Right? Don't have them firmly on the ground. Have them about an inch or two off the ground. So you still have to do a little bit of work. You still have to exercise. You still have to sleep. You still have to do your diet. But you will get better results and feel better if you do it that way than if you sit there and just lean into that peptides and use it as your only strategy for fat loss.
Yeah. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about people with low blood sugar, because I know I have a lot of people on here who struggle in the low blood sugar camp. Do not recommend for people with low blood sugar, because you will be eating less. And we know that people with low blood sugar issues, I mean, you would need to really work your way to a place where your blood sugar is really stable. And that might be where the insulin resistance starts to show up. So oftentimes I work with people and their blood sugar is just crashing and crashing, crashing, crashing. And then once we stabilize, that whole line of blood sugar will be elevated. So maybe that line where it should be maybe in the 80s and 90s, we see it in like 100, 110. We see it elevated. That's where that insulin resistance starts to show up in a different way now. And then I would say potentially you might be able to do it. But I mean, we need, the people who I work with hypoglycemia and reactive hypoglycemia, there's a lot of work we need to put into that. And not being able to eat a lot and not having that hunger, you're going to struggle to get in all you need to keep your blood sugar stable. So I would definitely not recommend for people in that camp. So
100%. What she said.
Awesome. Well, Nat, where can we find you and work with you? We're going to put everything in the show notes. Let's talk about your peptide group on Facebook in case people are interested.
Sure. So I've got two communities. There's a free community on Facebook, as Danny mentioned, called the Optimizing Superhuman Performance Group. I'm not in there that much these days, but it's a great, very vibrant, very busy, very large community. I have, for people who want to have more direct contact with me, I have a private membership community on Mighty Networks called the BSP community. The best way to find all the things that I do, including the podcast, which is the Biohacking Superhuman Performance podcast that we're having Danny on pretty soon, is go to natniddam.com. That's my website. And that's where you can sign up for my newsletter. There's a link at the top of the page, the BSP community, and everything's there pretty much.
Perfect. So I will link that. Yay. Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on, Nat. And thank you for sharing all your wisdom with us. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Danny. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it too. It's been great, as always.